Chapter 1 Whispers from Magdala. The morning winds that swept over the Sea of Galilee carried the scent of salt and sun-warmed earth. Gentle waves whispered against the stones, lapping with ancient rhythm along the shores of Magdala, a quiet, fishing town tucked beneath the watchful gaze of distant hills. This place, though small, bore the weight of many stories, and in one of its modest homes near the edges of the water, a little girl was born. Her name was Mary. She was not born to wealth nor to renown. She was not clothed in silk or guarded by servants, but from her earliest days the sea was her lullaby and the sunrise her ceiling. Her days began with the cries of gulls and ended beneath the hush of olive trees. She would walk barefoot on the shore, tiny footprints pressed into sand, only to vanish beneath the next tide. In the eyes of the world, she was just another child in a humble village. But even then, something in her spirit reached beyond the nets and boats and bustling markets. Mary would often sit by the water alone. She watched the fishermen mend their nets and the boats return heavy with the day's catch. She listened to the quiet between waves as though the sea itself was speaking in whispers. The elders spoke of prophets and promises. The scrolls told of Yahweh's mighty hand. And Mary, young and wide-eyed, wondered if heaven still spoke to earth. Her questions were not loud. They lived in her silences, her wondering eyes, her still hands pressed into wet sand. She grew in the quiet rhythm of Magdala, a girl of deep thoughts and deeper hunger, though she did not yet know for what. She was kind, observant, quiet in the way that some souls are, as if listening for something they can't quite name. Years passed like slow-moving clouds and the shoreline remained her sanctuary. But somewhere within that gentle beginning, something began to stir beneath the surface. A soul in silence. The girl who once laughed with the tide now carried a different silence. Not the stillness of peace, but of aching. Her eyes remained soft, but they often looked far off. Her shoulders, once light with the breeze, began to carry a hidden weight. Mary did not speak of it. There were no words for it. It was not an illness the body could show, not a wound one could bandage. It was something beneath the skin, beneath even her own understanding. Something had settled over her spirit slowly, like dusk creeping into day. At first, it was only a shadow at the edges, a heaviness in the morning, a quiet unrest in her chest. Then came the dreams, fragments of sorrow, images that woke her breathless and trembling. She grew fearful of sleep, of being alone, of herself. And yet, she told no one. Who could understand? How does one explain the ache of the soul, the sorrow that clings like fog? She helped at the markets. She tended to her home. She walked the same shoreline. But inside she was unraveling. There were days when she could barely feel the world around her. The sun felt too bright, the wind too sharp, and in her mind unspoken voices whispered doubts and fears that she could not silence. Loneliness wrapped around her like a second skin. Those who saw her may have thought her troubled, perhaps even strange, but they didn't see the depth of the ache, the way she cried without sound, the way her hands shook when no one watched. Mary was not wicked. She was not faithless. She was simply hurting. and in her silent suffering she began to drift from the world, from the laughter of children, from the songs of festivals, from the comfort of community. She wandered through, her days like a ghost, present but not truly there. Her soul was crying for something beyond words, beyond this world. 7 shadows. Scripture would later say she was tormented by 7 demons, not horns and fire and monstrous wings, but shadows, deep, suffocating shadows that wrapped around her soul like chains. Each one bore a name the world could not hear, but Mary felt each one in the marrow of her being. One was grief for the life she could not live. One was fear that she would never be free. One was shame, the kind that clings even without cause. One was anger, quiet, coiled, without direction. One was despair, so heavy it numbed even her prayers. One was confusion, a fog that blurred her very sense of self. And one was silence, the cruelest of them all. She did not rage. She did not wail in the streets. Her torment was quiet, inward, like a drowning soul smiling at the surface. Some said she was possessed, others whispered of madness, but the truth was simpler and more painful. Mary was suffering deeply, and she was alone in it. The synagogue could not reach her. The physicians could not heal her. Even the scriptures she once loved felt distant, like a language she no longer understood. She was surrounded by people, yet untouched, known by name, yet unseen. She began to believe this would be her life, a house haunted by shadows, a soul too shattered to be restored. Even prayer felt far away, like calling into a storm with no reply. But God was not far. He never is. Even in her most broken hour, heaven was leaning close, the one who saw her. And then Jesus came to Magdala. He did not arrive with trumpets. There were no banners or fanfare. He walked the dust like any other man. But his eyes, his eyes saw more than the surface. Where others saw a broken woman, he saw a daughter. Mary heard of him first in whispers, the healer, the teacher, the man who touched lepers and welcomed children, who spoke to the unworthy, who wept at gravesides and laughed with the poor. She listened from the edges of crowds, her heart stirring with every word. It was as if he spoke directly to the wounds she could not name. And then he looked at her. Not past her, not through her, but at her. His gaze was not heavy with pity, nor soft with fear. It was steady, pure. And in that gaze Mary felt known. Completely, utterly, not the version she wore for the world, but the real her, the tangled, trembling soul behind the silence. He did not ask her to explain. He did not turn away. He simply spoke, a word, a whisper, a truth that echoed deeper than her pain. And in that moment, the shadows began to flee. They did not flee with violence. They fled like mist before the morning sun. Her chains were not broken with thunder. They simply loosened. Her breath deepened. Her spirit steadied. And for the first time in years, she felt whole. The torment lifted. The voices quieted. The silence became stillness. And the ache became peace. Mary wept, not from sorrow, but from freedom, from release. She fell at his feet, not because she was commanded to, but because her soul could do nothing else. she had been seen, and in being seen, she was healed. Chapter 2. The Demons Depart. The sun had risen over Magdala with the same quiet rhythm as it always had, casting golden light across the hills and painting the sea in soft ripples of morning blue. But something in the air was different. There was no sound of rushing wind or crackling fire, no tremble in the earth or shouts from the heavens. Just a presence, calm, steady, like still water after a storm. Jesus stood before her, not far, not lofty, not hidden behind curtains of grandeur. He stood as close as a whisper. His eyes met hers again, and in that gaze there was no fear, no judgment, only peace. Mary had spent so long wrapped in the silence of suffering that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen, truly seen. But here, under the gentle gaze of the Son of Man, her soul stirred, not with anxiety, not with confusion, but with rest. She trembled, not from fear, but from the nearness of something sacred. He spoke. And though the words were few, they echoed louder than 1,000 storms in her heart. The voice of Jesus was unlike any she had ever heard. It did not rise to meet her torment. It did not thunder at the shadows within her. It simply spoke, like peace being poured into an empty vessel. And the shadows heard it. They did not fight. They did not wail. They knew that voice. They remembered it from before time began, and they left. One by one, the chains that had wrapped around Mary's spirit loosened and fell, not with noise, but with the silence of surrender. The 7 shadows that had haunted her, the sorrows, the fears, the grief, the shame, fled into the stillness, driven not by force, but by holiness. She fell to her knees, and for the first time in years, her soul was still. No more war within, no more heaviness pressing down, only breath, only light. Mary wept, but her tears were not of sorrow. They were the waters of rebirth. With every drop, something new was born in her spirit, a cleansing, a quiet joy. The demons had departed, but it was not the departure that defined her. It was the one who remained. And as she looked up at him, eyes blurred with grateful tears, she felt it deep within her. This was not the end of her story. It was the beginning. Falling into Lighty. Village of Magdala had not changed. The boats still bobbed on the water. The fishermen still called to one another across the shore. The smell of salt and bread still drifted from open windows. But to Mary, everything looked different. She walked the same paths she had walked for years, down the market lane, past the well, along the water's edge. But now the colors seemed brighter. The wind felt softer. The light poured through the trees like golden threads. It was as though she had been living beneath a veil, and now it had been lifted. Even her own hands looked new to her. The same fingers that once trembled now felt steady. The same voice that had long been silent now hummed softly with wonder. Mary touched the walls of her home as though waking from a long, heavy sleep. Grace had not only freed her, it had opened her eyes. She smiled at neighbors she once feared would see through her. She lingered at the water's edge, not to hide, but to give thanks. The sea, once a mirror for her sorrow, now shimmered with promise. There was no longer a war within. The shadows had gone, and in their place came peace, not loud, not dramatic, but deep. Like a candle in a dark room, grace filled every corner of her heart, chasing away what had once lived there. The healing had not only cast out darkness, it had made room for joy. She began to notice things she hadn't before. The laughter of children playing in the dust, the softness of a fig tree's shade, the kindness in a stranger's nod. Life had always been full of beauty, but now she had eyes to see it, and through it all, one name stirred on her lips again and again: Jesus. She remembered his voice, not just the sound, but the weight of it, how it calmed her soul, how it called her to life. She found herself whispering his name as she moved through the day, not as a plea, but as a song. Jesus had given her back her life, but more than that, he had given her himself. And Mary, once full of sorrow, now found herself full of light. The circle of women, word, count 500. It was not long before Mary found herself drawn beyond Magdala. The sea that once held her now released her. Her healing had not only restored her, it had called her to something greater. She followed the path of the teacher, drawn by love, not duty, and along the way she was not alone. There were others, women who had also been touched by his compassion, healed by his words, awakened by his presence. Some were widows, others were wives, some were young, others carried the wisdom of age. But they were all bound by one thing: love for the one who had changed them. Mary joined them not as an outsider, but as a sister. Together, they walked where he walked. They listened as he taught by the sea and beneath the trees. They prepared meals, cared for the weary, and whispered prayers into the stillness of night. Mary, once isolated by torment, now found herself surrounded by a circle of grace. These women did not fight for position. They did not argue for greatness. They simply served. And in that service, they found joy. Joanna, who had once lived in Herod's courts, now knelt in kitchens with a towel in hand. Susanna, gentle and steady, carried water jugs with quiet strength. And Mary of Magdala, walked among them with a heart full of gratitude and a voice that slowly returned in song. Together they supported the ministry, not only with food and supplies, but with prayer, with presence, with steadfast love. Jesus never pushed them aside. He never silenced their stories. He welcomed them, honored them, and the women in return gave him everything. Mary, in particular, grew close, not in title, but in spirit. She watched him with reverence. She listened with wonder, and in the secret places of her heart, she began to bloom. Her past no longer defined her. The 7 demons were not her name. Her name was Mary, a follower, a beloved, a woman redeemed, and now part of something holy. In the quiet hours, when the others slept and the stars flickered above them, Mary would sometimes sit alone and breathe in the stillness. Not out of sorrow, but out of awe. She was no longer a woman burdened by shame. She was part of the story now, part of the circle, part of the way. Whispers of purpose, word, count 500. Purpose does not always come like lightning. Sometimes it begins with a whisper. For Mary, it stirred in the stillness, in the rhythm of walking beside the teacher. in the hum of quiet conversations, in the small acts of love, the folded cloak, the shared meal, the prayer whispered over aching feet. She began to see that healing was not the end, it was the beginning. Her life had once been small, shadowed, silent. Now every step she took alongside Jesus revealed something more, not just about him, but about herself. She was not only healed, she was called. Each day she woke with new wonder. Where will we go today? Who will he speak to? What hearts will be changed? But slowly, her own heart was changing too. She had once longed simply to be whole. Now she longed to be useful in his kingdom. Not with titles or position, but with presence. She found joy in the quiet things, carrying baskets, soothing the sick, comforting the fearful. Her hands, once trembling, were now gentle with strength. Others began to look to her, not because she was above them, but because she had walked through fire and emerged in light. There was something in her eyes, something steady, something kind. She did not preach, she did not lead, she loved, and that love became her ministry. Jesus, in his quiet way, drew her close. He did not give her a scroll or a title, he gave her purpose. In his presence, she learned what it meant to be faithful, to serve without seeking attention, to follow without fear. In time, Mary's steps became steady. Her silence became peace. Her sorrow became testimony. She did not need to speak. Of the demons, the light in her life spoke for her. Every healed touch, every whispered prayer, every faithful step beside the teacher was her sermon. And deep within her, she knew. This was what she was made for. Not just to be rescued, but to walk with the rescuer. As the days turned and the path stretched forward, Mary followed not just with her feet, but with her heart. She was no longer the woman bound in silence. She was a disciple in spirit, a witness to mercy, a bearer of grace. And though the journey was only beginning, the voice of purpose had begun to sing within her, a quiet calling, a sacred whisper, a new name rising from within the stillness. Chapter 3: Following the Teacher. The morning sun stretched across the hills as Jesus walked, and Mary followed. There was no announcement, no grand procession, only footsteps in the dust, winding through valleys and over hills, through towns, with crowded gates and wilderness paths where silence lingered like breath. The teacher did not seek comfort, he sought heart. And wherever he went, Mary walked behind him, not ahead, not beside, but always near. Each day brought something new, yet sacred in its simplicity. There were moments of healing when a blind man opened his eyes to light for the first time, and the crowd gasped as if creation had just begun again. There were children gathered in his lap, their laughter a balm to the weary. There were parables spoken under fig trees as birds sang. Their gentle praise above, Mary watched, listened, and followed. But it wasn't only what he did that stirred her, it was who he was. He walked slowly, never rushed, as if every moment mattered. He stopped for the unnoticed. He bent down to those the world overlooked. His hands touched the untouchable. His eyes lingered on those who had forgotten they were seen. His words, though soft, carried the weight of eternity. Mary never tired of the journey. Even when her feet ached or the sun pressed heavy on her shoulders, she pressed on, drawn not by signs but by presence. She saw how he treated the poor with dignity, the sinners with kindness, the seekers with truth. She noticed how he turned toward every voice that cried for mercy, never away. And slowly, her understanding deepened. His teachings were not merely ideas, they were the echo of heaven touching the earth. In the quiet of dusk, when the day's dust settled and fires flickered under starlit skies, Mary would reflect on all she had seen, and though she rarely spoke, her silence was full, not of emptiness but of awe. Following Jesus wasn't a task, it was a joy, it was water for her soul. And the more she walked with him, the more she felt her heart change, not in sudden bursts, but in the gentle unfolding of grace. Bread, miracles, and the margins. Word, count, 500. They had walked for days, Jesus, the disciples, the women who served, and now they stood before a crowd that stretched beyond sight. Thousands had come, bringing their hunger, their sickness, their questions. The air buzzed with expectancy, but the sun was falling, and there was no food. Mary stood among the women, watching. The disciples murmured, the people stirred, yet Jesus did not worry. He asked for what was there, a few loaves, a handful of fish. And with quiet hands and heavenward eyes, he gave thanks. She watched as the miracle unfolded, not with thunder, but with tenderness. Bread multiplied. Baskets overflowed. Children laughed with full bellies. The weary looked up with tears. It was not just food that was shared, it was love. Later, in the hush that followed, Mary sat near the baskets of leftover fragments. The miracle still hung in the air. But more than the bread, it was the heart behind it that fed her. She remembered the healing of the leper, the joy of the woman who touched his cloak, the laughter of the man who once lay paralyzed. Again and again, Jesus reached into forgotten corners and pulled light from them. He had a way of turning margins into miracles. No one was too small for his attention, no story too broken. Mary saw it again and again in the eyes of the healed, in the songs of the freed. The kingdom he spoke of was not one of gold and swords, but of mercy and bread, of compassion and touch. She began to understand God's power did not lift itself above the people. It stooped down to meet them where they were. And in those moments, in the crumbs gathered after the feast, in the soft tears wiped from cheeks, Mary felt the heartbeat of heaven, not in palaces, but in fields, not among rulers, but among the poor, not through force, but through kindness. She walked through towns that barely had names, watched as Jesus healed beggars at dusty crossroads and taught widows by lamplight. And in every act, he wove a thread of love that bound the lowest to the highest. The kingdom was near. And it was beautiful. The murmurs of opposition, word count 500. But not everyone rejoiced. As the crowds grew, so did the questions. Whispers followed the teacher now, trails of suspicion, shadows of doubt. The Pharisees came with their robes and scrolls, watching closely, measuring every word, every gesture. Their eyes narrowed not in wonder, but in judgment. Mary saw that way their presence shifted the air, the way their questions curled like smoke, quiet but choking. Why does he eat with sinners? By what authority does he speak? Who does he think he is? Their murmurs did not shout. They whispered in corners, under breath, behind cloaks. But Mary felt their weight, the warmth that once surrounded. Their journey began to cool in places. There were glances that lingered too long, faces turned with suspicion. Towns once open became hesitant. Still Jesus walked. Still he healed. Still he loved, and Mary followed. There were days when the roads felt longer, when their arrival was met with silence instead of welcome, when men stood with arms crossed and his questions hung heavy in the air. But Jesus never changed. His voice remained soft, his eyes clear, his purpose steady and Mary. Mary kept walking. She never questioned her place, not because she was fearless, but because her faith had become her shelter. In the rising tension, her devotion deepened. She did not carry a sword or preach in the synagogues. She carried presence, loyalty, quiet strength. She prayed as she walked, not always with words. Sometimes with breath, with stillness, with tears that came in the solitude of night. She knew that the path was shifting, that not all who followed would remain. That love, even when perfect, is not always welcomed, but her feet did not falter. Jesus had called her from darkness into light, and she would not look back. Even as the murmurs thickened, as rumors wove themselves into the wind, Mary stayed near. Her faith was not loud, but it was unshakable, and in her silent loyalty she became a testimony, not of status, not of power, but of love that endures. Faith that rises in silence, word count 500. Mary's voice was not often heard in the crowds. She did not argue with the doubters or stand in the center of the circle. She simply remained, present, faithful, near. In a world where noise often claimed importance, Mary's silence spoke of something deeper. She listened. She observed, and she served, not because she was commanded to, but because love had taken root in her soul. When others debated, she prayed. When the road grew hard, she walked. When Jesus sat alone, she waited nearby, not intruding, just there. There was something in her stillness that reflected the very heart of the teacher she followed. Like him, she noticed the unnoticed. She touched the broken. She offered what she had, even when it was only presence. She was not there to be seen. She was there because she saw the truth in him, the grace in his words, the hope in his steps. And so she followed, through the hills and valleys, through crowds and cold nights, through joy and rising tension. Her devotion did not dim. Others came and went. Some were drawn by miracles. Some turned away when it cost too much. But Mary remained, not because she understood everything, but because she trusted him. In her silence, she bore witness to the kingdom growing in mustard seeds, to the mercy woven through every act, to the goodness of God made flesh. She didn't need a pulpit. Her life had become the sermon, and as she walked quietly behind the teacher, through fields of wheat and streets of stone, her faith rose, not in noise, but in peace. Her story would not be written in shouts, but in steps, in loyalty, in presence, in love that stayed
And heaven saw. Heaven always sees.
Chapter 4. The Anointing. In a quiet room where lamps flickered low and voices murmured gently over supper, a woman entered, carrying something small in her hands. A jar, not large but delicate. Crafted from alabaster, smooth and pale like moonlit stone. Within it was oil, pure, fragrant, and costly. The kind kept for sacred moments. The kind never used lightly. Some say it was Mary. Some wonder. Some argue. But for those who know her story, the moment reflects her heart. A woman who had once been broken, now full of love, offering what the world might not understand, but heaven would never forget. The meal was simple. Bread, olives, wine. The table was lined with men, disciples, followers, the curious and the faithful. And at the center sat Jesus, quiet and present, his eyes soft, his spirit steady. He did not call for her. She came on her own. Not with demands, not with questions, but with offering. She said nothing as she stepped forward. She only held the jar. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sacred weight of what she was about to do. This oil, this treasure, was more than perfume. It was a symbol of her love, of her gratitude, of her recognition. In a world where women were
Often unseen, unheard, forgotten, she came forward, not to be noticed, but to notice him. She had seen what others missed, his kindness, his mercy, his power, his gentleness.
She had felt the change in her soul since she had met him, how darkness had been replaced with light. And now there was only one thing left to do: pour out everything she had. The jar was not a show, it was a surrender, a small vessel, yes, but within it a great love was carried. She knelt, holding the jar close, and as silence filled the space, the fragrance of devotion was about to fill the air. Tears on his feet, word, count 500. She did not speak. She did not lift her eyes. She came low, kneeling at his feet, trembling in the stillness. And there she broke the jar. The sound was soft, stone giving way, a seal cracked open, as if the very heavens had released a sigh. And from within the oil flowed, rich, golden,
Fragrant, like sunlight liquefied. She poured it not on his head, but on his feet. The feet that had walked dusty roads, that had touched hillsides and valleys, that had carried mercy to the hurting, truth to the searching.
the feet of the one who had walked into her story and changed everything. As the oil touched him, her tears began to fall. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep, steady. Tears that had waited in silence now found their way down her cheeks, falling like
rain onto his skin. She wept not from sorrow, but from love, from awe,
from the weight of grace remembered. And then she did something the world would never forget. She let down her hair. In that time, in that place, it was not common. But love has no pride, and reverence has no fear. With hair like soft threads of devotion, she wiped his feet, gently, carefully, as if tending to the holy. No one moved, no one spoke. The oil mingled with her tears, the room filled with scent, not just of perfume, but of something eternal. This was not ritual. This was not performance. It was worship, pure, undiluted. Her hands moved slowly, reverently. Her tears fell like prayers. Her silence spoke louder than any sermon. It was the language of surrender, the language of one who had been forgiven much, of one who loved much. She did not ask for healing. She did not ask for favor. She brought only herself, and everything she had to give, and in doing so, she gave more than the oil. She gave her heart, a heart misunderstood. Word count 500, but not all hearts in the room understood. There were murmurs, whispers, raised brows, quiet scoffs behind lowered lids. Why this waste? Someone muttered. Couldn't the perfume have been sold, given to the poor? Another voice, colder still. If he were truly a prophet, he would know who this woman is. Mary did not respond. She didn't defend. She didn't explain. The room around her may have grown heavy with judgment, but her gaze remained downward, her heart fixed on the one before her. It is easy to judge what we do not understand, easy to miss the sacred when it does not come in the forms we expect, easy to see a woman and forget her story. But Jesus, he saw. He did not join the whispers. He broke them. "Leave her alone," he said. His voice was gentle, but it carried a weight that silenced every tongue. "She has done a beautiful thing to me." And in those few words, the whole world turned. Where others saw shame, he saw love. Where others saw waste, he saw worship. Where others saw a sinner, he saw a daughter. Jesus was not impressed by arguments or appearances. He was moved by hearts. And here, at his feet, was a heart that poured itself out, without shame, without fear, without holding anything back. He did not question her past. He did not measure her worth. He received her offering as one receives a treasure. Then he said, what none could have expected. Wherever this gospel is preached, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. He gave her story to the world, not because of her status, not because of her eloquence, but because of her love. It was a love misunderstood by man, but honored by God. And Mary, whether it was her or another like her, became a living parable, a picture of what it means to love with all your heart, to worship with your life, to give not because it is required, but because you cannot do otherwise. She had been seen, and in being seen, she had been honored by the only eyes that truly matter, the scent of mercy, word count 500. Long after the woman had gone, the fragrance lingered. It clung to the air. It settled into the room like a blessing. Wherever the oil had touched, stone, cloth, skin, it left behind a scent that would not fade. The disciples ate in silence, some thoughtful, some convicted, all quieted, and Jesus, still seated, breathed in the scent of mercy poured out. The perfume had been a costly gift, but what remained was even richer, a memory, a testimony, a love not silenced by doubt or shame. Mary's offering, whether this moment belonged to her or mirrored her soul, had done something few ever would. She gave all, and in return, her love became a fragrance that would linger through the centuries. When others returned to their homes, they would remember the feel of oil in the air, the glint of tears on stone, the hush that settled when heaven itself bore witness. To a heart surrendered, she came with nothing but love. She left with the approval of the Master. And long after the jar was empty, her offering remained full. It filled the memory of that place. It filled the heart of the Savior. It fills this story still, like a gentle wind carrying scent across time. Her love rises sweet, quiet, unseen yet unforgettable. It is the scent of mercy, not the kind spoken in sermons, but the kind lived in silence. Poured out, wiped with hair, offered with tears. This is what heaven remembers. And even now, when we offer our hearts, our humble acts, our quiet prayers, our tears that no one sees, we join her. We become part of that scent. We fill the air with worship, and the one who received her gift still receives ours, still defends the broken, still sees the beauty in surrender, still honors love that comes, quietly, gently, and with everything it has to give. And so, as the lamplight flickers low and the hush of the room returns, we remember the woman with the jar, the love she gave, the tears she offered, the mercy she received, and the fragrance that
never faded.
Chapter 5. The Way to the Cross. The road into Jerusalem shimmered beneath the spring sun, its dust lifted by the shuffle of thousands of feet. The city, ancient and golden, stirred with songs that filled the air like birds in flight. From the high Mount of Olives they had come, Jesus, his disciples, and a growing crowd. The people had heard the stories of healings, of hope, of the one who raised the dead and stilled the sea. And now he rode among them, not on a war horse, but on a donkey.
Quiet declaration, a fulfillment spoken long ago. Hosanna, they cried.
Hosanna in the highest. Palm branches waved like banners of peace. Cloaks were laid on the ground like a royal carpet. The people cheered with joy, their voices rising like incense. But not every heart danced. Among the crowd was Mary. She walked with the others, yet her spirit trembled. She saw the smiles and heard the songs, but she also saw his eyes. The way they searched the city, the stillness in his face, the quiet grief tucked behind his every step. Something was coming, something the others didn't see. Mary had learned to listen not only with her ears, but with her heart. And her heart whispered sorrow. The crowd saw triumph. She saw tenderness. They saw a king entering to reign. She saw a lamb preparing for sacrifice. Her hands held no branch, but her prayers rose like petals, falling quietly before him. Jerusalem would not understand. Not yet. And as the gate swallowed him in, Mary followed, each step a prayer, each breath a cry, too deep for words. She remembered the hills, the meals, the healings, the laughter. And now they were walking into a different silence, one not of peace, but of offering. Prophecies hung in the air like invisible threads, wrapping around every stone of the city. And as the sun dipped behind the temple towers, Mary's spirit grew still. Love had entered Jerusalem, and love would be poured out. The breaking of bread, word, count 500. The supper was spoken of in hushed tones. Not all were there, but word passed among the women, and Mary heard, a room above the city, a meal shared in candlelight, the final gathering of those who had walked so far together. She was not in the room, but she knew the heart of the one who broke the bread. The stories came slowly. He took the bread, someone whispered, and he blessed it, then broke.
It, he said it was his body, and the cup, he said the wine was his blood. Mary sat in the shadows, listening, a cloak around her shoulders, her hands clasped, her eyes closed. The words were strange, sacred, frightening. Body, broken, blood.
Poured. This was no ordinary meal. It was a farewell, not loud, not mournful, but intimate, eternal. She imagined his hands, the same hands that had touched the leper, lifted the child, washed feet now lifting the bread toward heaven. Did his voice tremble? Did his eyes linger longer on the faces he loved? The ones who still did not understand. Mary's heart ached. She could feel the heaviness he must have carried, the knowing, the quiet pain of love misunderstood. He had fed thousands. Now he fed a few. He had healed many. Now he prepared to be wounded. This meal, though simple, was not the end. It was the beginning of sorrow, the beginning of glory. Mary held the image close, the table, the bread, the cup, and she wept softly for a supper she did not taste, yet would never forget. Because love had lifted the bread, and love was about to be broken. The garden tears, word count 500, night had come. The city lights dimmed beneath a star-blanketed sky, and somewhere beyond the gates, in a grove of olive trees, he prayed. Mary could not go into the garden, but she knew where he had gone. Gethsemane, the place of pressing, the place where olives weep oil, and where the Son of God wept tears. She sat with the other women, a little apart. The air was cool, the moon pale. They did not speak, not much, only short prayers, only soft breath. Mary's heart felt like it was being pulled apart, slowly, silently. She could sense it, the weight on him, the sorrow that clung to his robe like dew. She imagined him kneeling there, alone, the earth beneath him familiar and
cold. She had once wept at his feet. Now he wept for the world. Father, if it be possible.
Mary's own whispers joined his. Let this cup pass. She remembered his words, the bread, the wine, his body, his blood, yet not my will. She closed her eyes, not his will. Her heart clenched, but yours be done. She let the silence wrap around
her like a veil. He prayed, even when no one stayed awake. He cried, even as angels drew near. He surrendered,
even as the weight of sin gathered like storm clouds overhead. Mary didn't need to see him to feel it. The garden shook with holy sorrow. Heaven held its breath, and she, small, waiting, praying, held her breath too. The night stretched on, still, heavy, and in that stillness, love whispered, yes. Taken by soldiers, word, count 500. Then came the noise, not the songs of Hosanna, but boots, swords, voices. Mary was not there in the moment of betrayal, but she heard. She saw the faces of those who were, their eyes wide, wet, stunned. He had been taken by soldiers, by fear, by hands that did not understand who they held. Judas had kissed him. Peter had drawn a sword, the disciples had scattered, and Jesus had surrendered, without struggle, without hate, without a word of protest. Mary's chest ached. She did not run. She did not sleep. She waited. She prayed. The city now felt cold, as if a veil had fallen over the light. She moved through it in silence, searching for news. Where is he now? What have they done? She heard whispers of trials, of false witnesses, of questions hurled like stones, and still, he did not fight. The lamb remained silent. She thought of his hands, the ones that had lifted her from despair. Would they be bound? She thought of his eyes, the ones that had seen her when no one else did. Would they now be covered? She thought of his voice, the one that had spoken peace into her chaos. Would they try to silence it? Mary did not weep loudly. Her tears were quiet, steady. She stayed near as she could, through alleys and rumors, through darkness and dread. Love does not walk away, and she would not walk away now. Her feet were tired, her soul worn, but her heart remained fixed on him. Jesus had given her life, and now, as his was being taken, she gave him her presence. No matter the cost, no matter the cross. Chapter 6. The Trial. The early morning light had not yet touched the rooftops when the crowd began to gather. Stone echoed with footsteps. Voices rose in murmurs that twisted through narrow alleys and filled the courtyard with unrest. Torches flickered, casting long, restless shadows on the walls. Mary stood among them. Not near, not at the center, but close enough to see, close enough to hear. Jesus had been taken from the garden, from prayer, from peace, and now he was passed from one hall to another, from one judge to another. The temple, the council, Herod, Pilate, again and again. Each place carried its own noise, the scraping of sandals, the clatter of weapons, the rising tone of accusation. Mary heard the words, but they did not ring true, not in her spirit, not in the quiet knowing of one who had been changed by him. False witnesses stood. They spoke with certainty but lacked understanding. Their words were sharp, but their hearts were hollow. Lies poured like oil on stone, spreading fast, hard to gather, impossible to clean. He claimed he would destroy the temple, one shouted. He calls himself the Son of God, said another, and beneath it all the hum of fear. Not in Jesus, but in them. Mary watched from behind the stone pillars, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The chill in the air did not come from the wind. It came from the hearts of those who could not see the truth. He stood before them, beaten, bound, silent, but not defeated. She could see the marks beginning to form, the redness around his eyes, the bruise near his jaw. And yet he did not fall. No
anger, no panic, only stillness. Mary's hands trembled, folded against her chest. She prayed. Not with eloquence, just with longing. That justice would prevail, that someone would speak truth.
That they would see who he really was. But the world did not want truth. Not that morning. The crowd had found a rhythm, a song of accusations, and the sound of it echoed into every corner of the city. Mary stayed in the shadows, listening, watching, Praying and the trial continued. Peter's denial, word, count, 500. There was a pause in the noise, a quiet space between questions. The crowd shifted. A man stumbled from the inner court, breathless, pale. Peter. Mary knew him. The fisherman. The rock. The bold one who had once walked on water. But now, he was breaking. His face was streaked with tears. His eyes red and distant. He leaned against the wall as though the world had grown too heavy for him to bear. Mary did not speak. She only watched. Then she heard it. Words carried on the wind. I do not know him. A voice. Peter's voice. Again. I do not know the man. And again, louder, sharper. I swear I do not know him. And then the
rooster. The cry of mourning. A sound that pierced deeper than swords. Peter's shoulders collapsed.
He covered his face, and the sob that escaped him was raw. The kind of grief that only comes when love has been denied. Mary's heart broke for him. She understood fear. She understood silence. But Peter's pain was something else, a soul caught. Between devotion and dread, he had followed. He had drawn his sword. He had stepped into fire for the one he loved. But in that hour, when courage faltered and eyes turned accusing, his heart gave way. And now he wept. Mary did not judge him. She knew that even faithful hearts can tremble, that even strong ones can fall. She stepped quietly closer, just enough to let him know he was not alone. Peter raised his eyes, and for a brief moment their gaze met. No words were exchanged, only a silent sharing of sorrow. And then he disappeared into the crowd. Mary remained, not because she was stronger, but because love had taught her to stay. She turned her eyes back toward the trial. Her Lord was still within. And though others ran, she would not. Not now, not ever. The silence of innocence, word, count, 500. Jesus stood before them again. Pilate asked the questions now. The Roman governor, the one with power to release or to condemn. Are you the king of the Jews? Silence. Do you not hear the charges they bring against you? Still, silence. Mary held her breath. Why wouldn't he speak? She longed for him, to defend himself, to tell them who he was, to break the confusion, to shatter the lies. But he stood quiet. There was no anger in his face, no fear, only sorrow, only peace. The lamb, silent before the shearers. Mary's tears gathered but did not fall. She saw it. This wasn't weakness, it was strength, the kind that bears pain without returning it, the kind that holds truth so deep it doesn't need to shout. Pilate grew restless. He found no fault. He offered a way out, a tradition, a prisoner to release. Barabbas, a murderer, a man known for violence. The crowd shouted for him. Their voices
rose with urgency. Release Barabbas. Pilate turned to the people. Then what shall I do with Jesus? They did not pause. Crucify him. Mary felt the earth shift beneath her feet. It echoed again. Crucify, and again, crucify.
She looked at the one she loved, still silent, still standing, not pleading, not protesting, only offering himself. Mary pressed her hands to her chest. Her breath was shallow, her vision blurred. The noise was rising, the judgment was near, but he remained, innocent, steady, willing. The silence was not defeat. It was the sound of a sacrifice. Condemned, word, count 500. Then the sentence was spoken. Not with ceremony, not with reverence, but with finality. He was condemned to the cross. Mary felt the sky darken inside her. The crowd erupted again. Some jeered, some laughed, some watched in strange silence. Soldiers prepared the instruments, the whip, the wood, the robe, and Jesus still did not resist. She saw them take him, stripping him, binding him, mocking him. A crown of thorns was pressed upon his head. Blood ran down his brow like mercy made visible. Mary turned away for a moment, the pain too deep, the love too near. But she did not leave. She could not. Each lash that struck him struck her soul. Each insult pierced her spirit. But still, she stayed, because that's what love does. It stays, even in horror, even in sorrow. Even when there is nothing left to give, Mary followed him as they led him away toward the place no one wanted to name, the place of the skull. She walked behind, her steps slow, her prayers silent. There was no saving him now, not from this. The time of miracles had given way to the hour of offering, and yet he had chosen this. He had not been taken. He had given himself for love, for the world, for her. Mary's heart beat with both sorrow and reverence. She did not understand everything, but she knew this. The one who had cast out her darkness was now walking into his own, and he did it willingly. Because love always goes the farthest, even to a cross, even to death, even for those who would not understand. As the crowd moved on, Mary lingered at the edge of the street, her cloak heavy, her spirit full. She would follow him still, to the hill, to the cross, to the end, whatever it meant. Because love had walked with her, and now she would walk with love. Chapter 7. The Walk of Sorrows. The sun had barely crested the horizon when they took him. The morning air, heavy with dust and judgment, offered no comfort to the broken. The city stirred with cruel anticipation, its cobblestone alleys echoing the cries of the condemned. And in the midst of this bitter mourning, he walked, the cross pressing down upon his torn shoulders. Mary of Magdala followed behind, her heart crushed beneath a weight no wood could rival. Her eyes never left him, not since the first blow, not since the garden, not since he was taken. She moved like a shadow, silent, aching, reverent. Each step he took, she took. Each stumble, she flinched. Each drop of blood on the path, a wound etched into her own soul. The streets of Jerusalem narrowed like the throat of sorrow. The people lined the way, some watching with pity, others with scorn. Mary did not see them. She saw only him. His feet, raw and dirtied, his face bruised but radiant with a love too vast for the moment, his silence, a psalm of submission that pierced deeper than any cry. The soldiers jeered, impatient and hardened. Their hands pushed him forward, their whips cracked the air like thunder. But she never turned away. No fear, no shame, no bitterness. Only a fierce, holy devotion. This was the Lamb she had loved, the teacher who had lifted her from darkness, the friend who had called her by name, and now the road was leading to the place called Skull. The crowd swelled as they climbed. Mary's feet throbbed with weariness, but she would not stop. Her tears fell without sound, tracing the lines of her face as if trying to wash away the horror of this moment. The world, it seemed, had gone mad. And yet, he walked on. So she walked on. The cross scraped against stone, dragging behind him like the burden of all mankind. And Mary, the woman who had once knelt in joy at his feet, now walked behind his suffering, a silent witness to the final journey of love incarnate. The weeping women. At a bend in the road, the procession slowed. Voices rose, soft, broken, familiar. The women of Jerusalem had gathered, their faces streaked with sorrow, their hands raised in mourning. These were not strangers. These were daughters of the covenant, mothers, sisters, wives. Their souls, stirred by divine grief, could not stay away. Mary stood among them, her presence as still as a prayer. The others cried aloud, their laments rising like incense to a cloud-darkened sky. But Mary's grief was deep, quieter, heavier, like a stone in the belly of the sea. She held her shawl close, not to hide, but to ground herself in the storm of anguish. The women wailed for
him, for what was being done to him. Some tore their garments.
Others beat their chests. Their cries were not rehearsed. They were the pure utterance of hearts torn open. They knew, somehow, in the marrow of their being, that this was not just another death. This was the unmaking of hope, the sorrow
of heaven rippling through their bones. Jesus turned his face toward them despite the weight, despite the pain. Blood dripped from his brow. His eyes, though swollen and bruised, still held mercy.
"Daughters of Jerusalem," he said, his voice trembling yet clear, "do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." The moment froze in time. Even the dust in the air seemed to pause. Mary felt his words land in her, spirit-like seeds, painful, prophetic, and true. They were not words of complaint. They were not cries for comfort. They were the voice of a shepherd mourning for his flock. The women wept louder. Mary wept still, not just for him, but for the sin that nailed him there, for the world that could not see the light standing in their midst, for the innocence that was about to be lifted up in agony so that all might be forgiven. And though the world wept that day, none wept more deeply than the women who had walked with him, and now watched him walk toward death. A mother's pain. As the hill drew near, the crowd thinned. The noise faded into a low hum of grief and breathlessness. And there, standing at the edge of the path, was another woman, cloaked in blue, silent and unmoving, Mary, the mother of Jesus. Her face bore no screams, no outward tears, but her eyes held the storm of 1,000 lifetimes. She had cradled him as a babe, taught him to walk, kissed his scraped knees, and now she watched him stumble beneath the beam of wood that would hold his final breath. Mary of Magdala approached her slowly, reverently. No words were spoken, none were needed. One was weeping for her son, the other for her Savior. But in that quiet space between them, a sacred understanding passed, as if their tears had joined hands. Together they stood as the procession moved forward. Two women bound by love to the same man. One had birthed him into the world. The other had witnessed him birth new life into hers. And now both stood helpless as the world prepared to take him away. The sky, once golden with morning, had begun to dim. A chill wind coiled around the base of the hill. Time, it seemed, was holding
its breath. The cross loomed higher.
The end was near. Mary, the mother, did not cry out. Her strength was quiet, ancient, rooted in faith too deep for words. But Mary Magdalene saw the tremble in her lips, the slight shake of her hands. And so, without thinking, she reached out and held her. Together, they bore the ache of the universe. Together, they became the cradle of humanity's sorrow. And in their stillness, they reflected the heart of God, broken but never bitter, suffering but full of grace. The nails and the sky, they reached the summit, Golgotha, the place of the skull. The name alone carried dread, but it was the sound, or the absence of it, that pierced deepest. The crowd gathered, but no one cheered. The soldiers moved with cold efficiency. And in the center of it all stood the cross. Mary could hardly breathe. Her legs trembled beneath her. Her heart pounded like a war drum in a field of silence. And yet she did not look away. She would not. She had followed him through life. She would follow him into death. They laid him down on the wood. The nails glinted in the pale
light.
The hammer rose. One blow, then another and another. Each strike echoed across the hill, through the bones of the earth and deep into the core of her soul. She clutched her shawl tighter. She could feel the nails in her own flesh, the thorns in her own mind, the cross in her own chest, but still, she did not look away. The sky began to change. Clouds swirled with a strange, unnatural weight. The sun, once strong, now dimmed like a candle, losing breath. The earth itself seemed confused, trembling beneath the weight of what was being done. They lifted him high, and there he hung, arms outstretched, hands pierced, eyes closed in surrender. Not defeated, not conquered, but offered. Mary fell too.
Her knees. She did not scream. She did not flee. She simply wept.
The kind of weeping that cannot be explained, only felt. She watched the sky turn black at midday. She heard the groaning of the earth. She heard him speak, words of mercy, of anguish, of completion. And through it all, she remained, at the foot of the cross. Beneath the shadow of salvation, love had brought her here, and love would not let her turn away. She stayed, as the sky wept, as the earth quaked, as the veil between heaven and earth began to tear. She stayed, not because she understood, but because she believed. And in that moment, as darkness swallowed the world, Mary Magdalene became more than a follower. She became a witness to the greatest love the world would ever know. And still, she did not look away. Chapter 8. The Longest Hours. The hill stood quiet now. Golgotha, the place of the skull, had become a sanctuary of sorrow. The voices that once cried out in rage were hushed. The hammer had fallen silent. And high above the earth, upon rough-hewn beams, the Son of God hung between heaven and man. Mary Magdalene stood near the foot of the cross, her eyes fixed upon him. The world around her faded. The soldiers, the murmuring crowd, the sting of wind against her skin. All she
saw was him, his arms stretched wide, his body broken, his face crowned in thorns, yet still beautiful.
Still holy. Time no longer moved as it should. Each heartbeat was an eternity. Each breath he drew felt like the rise and fall of a mountain. The sky, which had begun to darken, cast a veil over the land, not of shadow, but of reverence. It was as if creation itself was holding its breath, unable to comprehend what it witnessed. She remembered his hands, how they had lifted the heads of the weary, how they had blessed bread and broken it, how they had written in the dust beside her. Now those hands were pierced, fastened by iron, trembling with pain, yet still open. Always open, the world had turned cruel. But he, even now, looked upon them with love. The wind began to stir. A hush rolled over the hill like a sacred hymn. Mary's heart beat softly, painfully, with every moment he remained above her. She did not know what would
happen next. She only knew that she would not leave, not while he still breathed.
Not while the cross stood tall against the sky. She reached out, not to touch him, for she could not, but to anchor herself, to keep from falling under the weight of sorrow. She whispered his name, not aloud, but in the quiet places of her heart, and he, though high above, seemed to hear. Because he looked down, and even in agony, he saw her. Words from the cross. From that place between heaven and earth, Jesus spoke. His voice, though hoarse and dry, cut through the silence like a bell in a sleeping city. Each word was more than sound, it was spirit. It was light. Father, forgive them, he said, for they know not what they do. Mary closed her eyes. Forgive them? Even now, even here, he offered grace. She felt her chest ache, not with grief, but with awe. He was not angry. He was not afraid. He was praying for them, for all, for her. Another voice rose beside him, a thief, broken and guilty, hanging on his own cross. And again Jesus answered with mercy, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Paradise. The word fell like dew upon the soul. In this place of death, he still gave life. He still promised hope. Then his gaze moved, slow and deliberate, toward his mother, Mary, the woman who had first held him, the woman who had kissed his brow in childhood, and now watched that brow crowned in suffering. And beside her stood the disciple he loved, John, faithful and near. "Woman, behold your son," he said. And then, to John, "Behold your mother." Mary Magdalene felt the holy tenderness in those words. Even in his final hour, he made sure they would not be alone. Even in pain, he was still the shepherd, still guiding, still caring for his flock. Time passed, heavy and slow. "I thirst," he said, A soldier lifted a sponge soaked in vinegar. He drank, but only a little. Enough to speak again, and this
Time. His voice rose, not with anger, not with despair, but with finality. It is finished.
The words rang through the sky like thunder without sound, not a cry of defeat, but a declaration, a promise fulfilled. Mary trembled. Then one last time, he lifted his voice. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And with that, he breathed his last. The earth trembles. Silence followed, and then when the world changed, the sky, already dim, grew black, not with cloud, but with a darkness deeper than night, a holy shadow, a mourning of creation itself. The sun hid its face. The birds fell quiet. Even the wind seemed to vanish, and then the ground beneath their feet began to shake. Mary staggered, clutching the base of the cross. Stones tumbled, the earth groaned. The veil of the temple, that sacred cloth which had stood for generations between God and man, tore in two from top to bottom. A divine curtain opened. Heaven had drawn near. Tombs cracked, rocks split, and in the deep places of the world something shifted. Not just death, but power. Not just sorrow, but fulfillment. The law had been met, the promise kept. Mary's tears flowed freely now, not only for grief, but for the weight of what had happened. The one they had loved was gone, but the world would never be the same. The centurion, a hardened man, stood nearby, his eyes wide, his voice trembling. "Truly," he said, "this was the Son of God." Mary heard the words and held them close. Not because she needed proof. She had always known, but to hear it spoken now, here, amid the silence and the trembling, was like balm on a torn soul. The shaking ceased, the darkness lingered, but something holy had begun. The quiet, after the wind fell still, the earth was hushed like the breath of a child who has finally cried herself to sleep. The crowd, once swollen with noise and fury, had faded. Some fled in fear, others wept and wandered. The hill was nearly empty now. But Mary remained. She knelt at the base of the cross, her hands resting gently on the ground where his blood had fallen. She did not move, she did not speak. Her grief was sacred, her silence a prayer. Beside her, the mother of Jesus stood still, her face pale with sorrow, but her spine unbroken. John, quiet and strong, stayed close, and the other women, faithful and trembling, watched from the shadows. But Mary Magdalene, she could not look away. The wind touched her hair like a ghost, the sky still mourned. And though he was gone, his presence lingered, not in the way of the living, but in the way of something eternal. Something that would not be taken by death. She remembered the words he had spoken, all of them. The forgiveness, the promise, the love. And now, this silence, it was not empty, it was full of mystery, full of pain, full of waiting. The body of Jesus still hung above her, still pierced, still crowned. But he was not there, not fully. Something had shifted. Something unseen had taken place. Mary stayed. As day turned to dusk, she did not move. She would remain through the quiet. She would wait in the stillness, because something in her heart, bruised though it was, knew this was not the end. Something holy still breathed beneath the silence, and she would not look away. Chapter 9. The Tomb. The sky, once roaring with storm and darkness, now settled into a strange and silent stillness. Golgotha stood quiet, the shadows lengthening as the sun began to fall behind the hills. The cross remained upright, but the life it had carried was gone. The air was heavy with the sorrow of those who stayed, and Mary Magdalene, her garments clinging with dust and grief, stood close still. She did not speak. She did not cry aloud. Her voice was buried in the hollow where her heart had been. And then, movement. Joseph of Arimathea, a man of status, quiet and faithful, had come, and with him Nicodemus, bearing myrrh and aloes. They had received permission to take the body, to do what others feared or simply could not bear. Mary stepped forward. Her eyes met theirs, weary but willing. She did not need to be asked. She would not let him be carried away alone. The soldiers, now tired and indifferent, turned aside. The crowd had scattered. The mocking was done. But Mary remained. They lowered him gently. His body, once so full of light, now rested heavy in their arms. The thorns were gone, yet the marks remained. His hands, his feet, his side. Mary knelt beside him, trembling. Her fingers, tender and reverent, helped with the cloth. She did not flinch at the wounds. She had followed him through life, watched him die, and now, even in death, she would serve. The linen was soft, soaked in tears and perfume. With each fold, they wrapped not just his body, but their devotion, carefully, slowly, the way one holds something holy. Mary's hands did not stop moving. Even as her arms ached, even as her knees gave way, she stayed beside him, wiping, folding, binding. Her fingers knew this would be the last time they touched him. And so she did not rush. She did not let go, and when it was finished, when the body was fully prepared, they lifted him once more and began the walk toward the garden. The garden of stones. The evening deepened. The sky now glowed with the soft light of dusk. They moved through a quiet grove where olive trees stretched their limbs toward heaven like supplicants in prayer. And nestled among the roots and stones was a tomb, newly hewn, never before used. The resting place of a king. Joseph led the way, his heart steady, though the weight of it all pressed upon his shoulders. Nicodemus followed, carrying what remained of his offering. And behind them walked Mary, quiet, solemn, and still faithful. The tomb was carved from rock, cold and unfeeling. But they made it holy by their presence, by their love. Inside, they placed him upon the stone slab. The linen shimmered in the fading light. The fragrance of the spices clung to the air, sweet, sacred, almost unbearable. Mary stood in the doorway watching. There were no prayers spoken aloud, no laments shouted to the heavens. Just silence, a silence filled with ache and reverence. Joseph stepped back. Nicodemus nodded once, and then, and with great effort, they rolled the stone into place. It echoed as it settled, sealing the tomb shut. A sound that split the soul. The stone blocked out the light, and with it, hope seemed to flicker. The one who had healed, who had walked on water, who had forgiven sins, who had raised the dead, now lay behind stone, wrapped in linen, still and lifeless. The garden grew dim. The birds hushed. Night had come. Mary stood at the entrance long after the others had gone. She placed her hand upon the cold stone. She closed her eyes, and though her body ached, she whispered her final vow. She would come again, even if no one else did, even if all was lost. She would return, because love remembers, even in the dark. The Sabbath. Wait the next day. The city was hushed, not with peace, but with waiting. It was the Sabbath, the day of rest, a commandment from God, a sacred rhythm passed down through generations. And so Mary returned to her home to observe as the law required, but her spirit did not rest. Her body sat still, her hands were folded, but her thoughts wandered like sheep without a shepherd. She remembered his voice, his laughter, his hands lifting the broken, touching the blind, blessing the bread. She remembered the moment he called her by name, the way he had looked at her, not with shame, but with joy, as if he saw more in her than she ever thought possible. Now that voice was silent. That gaze was gone. She lay on her mat as the sun passed overhead. She listened to the stillness, the kind that fills a house when something beloved has been lost. The walls held her sorrow. The shadows clung to it. She did not speak much that day, nor did she eat. The Sabbath, once a delight, now felt long, heavy, empty, but she obeyed, because even in grief she honored the commandment. Not because she understood, but because she trusted. Trusted the God she could no longer see. She prayed, though the words felt broken. She waited, though she did not know what would come. She remembered, and she wept, and in the stillness of that holy day, Mary's soul became a vessel, not just of sorrow, but of faith, for she did not yet know what waited beyond the dawn, anointing oils in hand. As the stars faded and the horizon blushed with the first light of dawn, Mary rose. The Sabbath was over. The silence remained, but her heart stirred with quiet resolve. She had rested, she had mourned, and now she would return. She gathered the spices, the oils, the cloths, the small jars she had prepared days before, now wrapped in linen and carried with care. These were the gifts of the grieving, the final service of love. Other women came with her. Salome, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James. But it was Mary of Magdala who led the way. Her steps were slow yet certain. The dew soaked her sandals. The sky above was pale and still. And though her arms were full, it was her heart that bore the greater weight. She did not come expecting joy. She did not come hoping for a miracle. She came because love does not forget. The path to the tomb was quiet. The garden lay ahead. The stone would be heavy, but she would not be turned away. She remembered where they had laid him. She remembered the way the light had faded that evening. She remembered the vow she had whispered to the sealed grave. Now, with oil in hand and sorrow in her bones, she returned. Because love, real love, does not end at the grave. It wakes before the sun, it walks in the dark, It carries perfume and cloth and hope wrapped in mourning, and though she could not
have known, though her heart still beat with grief, the one she came to anoint was already rising.
Chapter 10. Morning Light. The stars still hung in the sky when Mary Magdalene rose. The earth lay in hush, wrapped in the final veil of night. The city was quiet, its streets still breathing in shadows. And yet her heart stirred with longing, the kind that neither sleep nor silence could still. She moved with care, her garments gathered close, her hands carrying the jars of spices prepared with love. The air was cool. The stones beneath her sandals damp with dew. But her steps were steady, each one placed with devotion. A pilgrimage of grief, a walk of remembrance. No birds sang yet. No sun had broken through the clouds. But something in her soul refused to wait. She had promised she would return, and now she did. Not because she expected joy, but because love still burned like a quiet flame inside her chest. As she walked through the city gates and into the garden path, the first breath of dawn began to whisper against the hills. The sky was still dark, not black, but that soft, sacred blue that comes just before the light. Her fingers tightened around the oils. Her pace did not falter. She was not alone. The other women followed, but it was Mary who led, drawn forward by sorrow, by memory, by something she could not yet name. They reached the place. The hill was still, the garden silent. And then she saw it. The stone rolled away. The tomb stood open. The stone, that great heavy seal of death, had been rolled aside. Not cracked, not broken, rolled, as if by unseen hands, as if by power, beyond earth. Mary stopped. The others gasped. The jars trembled in her arms. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. Her eyes searched the entrance, expecting, fearing, a desecration, an insult, a theft, anything. But the body was not there. The place where he had been laid was empty. The linen cloths lay folded. The scent of burial still lingered in the
air, but the one they had come to anoint was gone. A storm of emotion surged within her. Fear, confusion, wonder. Her knees felt weak. Her hands shook.
What had happened? Where was he? Who had done this? The silence in the tomb was not hollow. It was thick with mystery. Mary looked around, hoping for answers, but found only stillness. This was not what she had prepared for. This was not what she had expected. The final service she had come to offer, the quiet anointing of his broken body, had been taken from her. And yet, something stirred. Not yet hope, but not despair. Something deeper, angels in white. As she peered into the tomb again, her eyes adjusted to the soft shadows within. There, at either end of the stone slab where his body had been, sat two figures, radiant, dressed in white. Their presence was not frightening, but otherworldly. As if heaven had rested itself in the stillness of that cave, they were not glowing with fire, nor wielding swords. But there was power in their peace, a brightness that whispered eternity. One sat where his head had rested. Vigdisa other, where his feet had been, and they asked her, gently, kindly, almost tenderly, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Mary swallowed, her voice a whisper barely heard above her heartbeat. "They have taken my Lord," she said, "and I do not know where they have laid him." She was not angry, she was not frantic, she was broken and honest. The angels did not answer. They only watched. And then she turned. Something made her turn. She felt it before she saw it. The sense of someone behind her, someone standing, someone near. Her eyes lifted, and there, in the garden, stood a man. Tears in the garden. Mary's vision was clouded with tears. Her heart, still trembling, did not yet understand what her eyes now saw. The man stood quietly. He did not speak at once. He was near, but not too near. His presence did not startle. It comforted, like the hush of water over stones, like wind in olive branches. She did not recognize him. Perhaps her eyes were too swollen. Perhaps her soul was not yet ready. He asked her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" She thought he was the gardener, the keeper of the place, the one who tended to the graves and the trees. "Sir," she said, "if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him." Her voice cracked. She could not hold back the sob that followed. And then the man said her name, Mary. That was all. Just her name, but it was enough. Her eyes widened. Her breath stilled. Her soul remembered what her eyes had not yet seen. She turned fully now, heart pounding, knees trembling. "Rabboni!" she cried. "Teacher!" Her voice full of
wonder and tears and love. It was him, alive, whole, standing before her, not as a spirit, not as a memory, but as Jesus. Her Jesus. He smiled, gentle and full of peace.
"Do not cling to me," he said softly, "for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary nodded, though her heart longed to stay. She did not cling, she obeyed, because love that is real lets go, not in sorrow, but in faith. And so she turned and ran. Not with grief, but with joy, not with mourning, but with the message of resurrection. Mary Magdalene, the one who had followed him to the end, was now the first to carry the news of life. She had gone to anoint the dead, but she returned bearing the light of the living. And as she disappeared down the garden path, the sun finally rose. Chapter 11. Rabboni. The garden was quiet. The early light had just begun to stretch across the stones, soft and golden, like a gentle hand touching the earth. A hush filled the air, not the hush of sorrow, but of something about to begin. Mary stood just outside the tomb. Her eyes, though open, could not yet see what was true. Her heart still beat with sorrow. Her tears still flowed in silence. She had come seeking the one she loved, and he was gone. She looked again into the empty tomb. The linen still lay there, folded. The place where his body had rested was bare. The two figures in white had asked their question. "Why are you weeping?" She had answered, not with hope, but with ache. Then she turned. Behind her, someone stood. A man. She did not know him. Or perhaps she could not know him. Not yet. Her eyes were clouded not only by tears, but by grief that ran deep. He asked her, "Woman, why are you weeping?"
"Whom are you seeking?" She thought he was the gardener, the caretaker of the place, the one who might know where they had taken her Lord. She pleaded with him, voice trembling like a leaf in wind. "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me."
"Where you have laid him, and I will take him." She did not ask for proof. She did not demand answers. She simply wanted him back. And then it happened. He spoke one word, "Mary."
Her name. Just that, but in that word was everything. In that one word, the veil was lifted. Her heart awakened. Her soul leapt. No trumpet sounded. No angel announced it. Just her name, spoken with a love deeper than oceans, older than time. And
she knew. She knew it was him, her teacher, alive. She turned fully now, not just in body but in spirit. Her eyes, once dimmed by sorrow, now shone with recognition. "Rabboni!" she cried. "Teacher, master, beloved!" It was not a title of formality. It was a cry from the depths of her soul. Jesus stood before her, not wounded and wrapped in cloth, not hidden behind stone, but alive, whole, glorious. His face bore peace. His hands, though marked, reached not in pain but in blessing. His presence filled the garden like light fills the dawn. And Mary, the
one who had knelt at his feet, who had watched him die, who had wept by his tomb, now saw him standing before her, risen from the grave. Tears fell again, but now they were not born of grief.
They were born of joy so deep it could hardly be named, a joy that shook the soul and stilled the heart all at once. He was alive, alive. The death she had witnessed was not the end. The silence of the tomb was not final. The sorrow of the cross had bloomed into resurrection. She did not speak more. She did not need to. Her eyes said what words could not. "Thank you, I love you, I believe." She had come to anoint the dead. She had found the living Christ. The garden around them felt like Eden reborn. Where the curse began, now the promise stood.
And Mary, once filled with sorrow, now stood in the center of grace. He had called her by name, and she had answered, "Do not hold on to me." She stepped toward him. Her hands, trembling and eager, reached out, not to test, not to doubt, but simply
to hold, to feel, to cling to the one she had lost and found again. But Jesus spoke gently, firmly. "Do not hold on to me." The words were not rejection, they were invitation to something deeper, to understanding, not possession. "For I have not yet ascended to the Father," he said. His voice, calm and radiant, held no distance, only purpose. This moment was not just reunion, it was revelation. He stood before her not merely as teacher, not even just as friend. He stood as the risen Son, the Lamb who had overcome, the Word who had broken through death itself. Mary's love was true. Her devotion was whole. But now her faith would be asked to grow, from what she could hold to what she must believe. from present to promise. The garden, once a place of weeping, had become the threshold of a new world. He was going to the Father, to prepare a place, to complete what had begun before time itself. And still, he had come to her first. Not to Peter, not to John, to Mary. He had spoken her name. He had trusted her heart. And now he gave her a task. Go and tell the others. Go to my brothers, Jesus said, and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. The moment was sacred, and so was the mission. Mary, once a woman of shadows and sorrow, had become the first witness of the resurrection. The first to see, the first to hear, the first to know, and now the first to tell. She did not hesitate. The tears still wet on her cheeks, her hands still full of the oils meant for burial, but her heart now lit with the fire of life. She turned from the garden and ran, not with the heaviness of grief, but with the lightness of purpose. Every step carried the gospel. He is alive, he is risen. He has called me by name. She reached the others, the disciples, gathered still in fear, hidden behind walls of doubt and grief, and she spoke the words that would echo through the ages. I have seen the Lord. Her voice, steady and full of wonder, broke through the silence like a song sung at sunrise. They did not yet understand, but she had seen. They had not yet touched, but she had heard. She,
Mary of Magdalene, the one healed, the one faithful, the one forgotten by the world, had been chosen by heaven to carry the light. Not just a message, a witness, a beginning. And in that moment, the garden gave birth to a movement, and Mary's
name was written not in stone, but in the story of redemption. She had come looking for a body. She left bearing resurrection. Chapter 12. Apostle to the Apostles. The city had not yet stirred. Jerusalem still slept beneath the hush of morning, her stone streets cool with dew, her courtyards draped in shadows. But Mary ran. Her breath caught in her chest, her heart thundered against her ribs, and her hands trembled with something far greater than fear. She ran not from sorrow now, but toward life, breathless, undone, and utterly alive with wonder. The folds of her garment billowed behind her as she crossed narrow alleys and market stalls, past shuttered windows and still silent homes. Each footfall echoed like a heartbeat across the waking earth. The air itself felt different, lighter somehow, as if the grief that had cloaked the city these past 3 days was lifting thread by thread into the heavens. She had seen him, not
a vision,
not a spirit, but the Lord, her teacher, her Rabboni, alive, standing before her in the garden, calling her name with that same voice that had once driven out her torment. Mary, he had said, and everything, the weeping, the darkness, the sorrow of that terrible cross, had fallen away like morning mist. She had lingered there only a moment longer, trembling in awe before he gave her the command. Go to my brothers, he told her. Tell them. So she ran. Through narrow passageways, past the olive presses and water jars, across the uneven stones that bore witness to 1,000 stories. but none like this. She clutched the memory to her heart like a lamp in the night, and with every step, her spirit whispered the truth that burned within her. He is not dead. He is risen. He is risen. She found them gathered in the upper room, the same place where grief had swallowed their voices and locked their hearts in silence. The doors were shut. Fear still clung to the walls like smoke. But Mary burst in, her face lit with something they had never seen before, not just hope, but resurrection. Her voice shook with joy and wonder. "I have seen the Lord," she said. They looked at her, startled, unsure. Some sat motionless. Others rose to their
feet. Confusion flickered across their faces. She did not wait for their questions.
She told them everything. The empty tomb, the angels, the voice that called her name, the eyes that met hers with love deeper than the sea. "He is alive," she said again, this time through tears. "I saw him. He is risen." Some wept, some doubted. Some held their breath in wonder. Peter stepped forward, his face shadowed with sorrow and longing, trying to make sense of her words. Thomas frowned, unsure whether this was hope or madness, but the truth had been spoken. The stone had been rolled away. The grave was empty, and Mary of Magdala, once dismissed and forgotten, had been chosen to carry the news that would dare shake the world. They had walked with him for years, but she had seen him risen. And now her words would echo through the ages. He lives. The women who believed. The news spread quietly at first, like a breeze whispering through wheat fields, like the first bird calling in dawn silence. Others came, Joanna, Salome, Mary, the mother of James, each bearing pieces of the same impossible story. They too had seen the stone rolled away. They too had heard the angel's words. "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" They had not all seen him yet. But they believed, and in a world that often silenced their voices, these women became the first to cradle the resurrection in their hearts. They spoke not with pride, but with awe. They did not argue or demand belief. They simply bore witness to what they knew. Together they wept, not in mourning, but in joy. They remembered his words, how he had spoken of rising again. And now the darkness of Golgotha was no longer the end of the story. It was women who stood at the cross. Women who prepared his body. Women who rose early in sorrow and were met with glory. And it was Mary Magdalene who stood first among them, not because she was greater, but because grace had met her deepest need. From the edges of society, these women stepped into the center of the greatest story ever told, not by force, not by power, but by quiet faith and unwavering love. They had followed him in life. Now they followed him into resurrection, chosen to carry light. Mary's past had been shadowed with torment. Once she had lived among tombs of her own, places of silence, fear, and chains unseen. The world had called her broken. Some had whispered worse. But Jesus had seen her. He had spoken to her. He had cast out her darkness with a word. And now, that same woman, the one once bound by despair, was the first to see the dawn of everlasting life. She had been the first to call him Rabboni on resurrection ground, the first to tell the others, the first to carry the light that could.
Not be overcome, not by birthright, not by title, but by mercy. In choosing Mary, the Lord rewrote the story of worth.
He placed divine truth into the hands of the one least expected, and trusted her with the fire of hope that would ignite the church. She did not seek honor. She did not claim a throne. She bore the message with humility and wonder, as one who had seen death fall backward before the breath of God. In the quiet corners of the world where voices are often forgotten, her story still speaks. She was the apostle to the apostles, not by proclamation, but by encounter, for she had seen the
risen Christ.
And in her eyes the light of resurrection still shines, and so her story endures, not with trumpet or crown, but with the gentle strength of one who knew what it meant to be lost and to be found. The garden, the tomb, the name whispered by the Lord himself, they remain as sacred footprints in the story of grace. And in every heart that dares to believe, her witness lives on. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Chapter 13. Behind closed doors. The sun had risen, but the light had not yet reached every heart. Inside the upper room, the disciples sat cloaked in fear. The door was bolted, the windows shuttered. Shadows clung to the walls like memories they could not forget. The world outside buzzed with rumors of an empty tomb, of guards bewildered, of a body that could not be found. But inside there was only silence. Mary was there. She sat near the edge of the room, not trying to speak, not pressing to be heard. She had already said all she could say, that she had seen him, that he was alive, that he had called her by name, in a garden washed with dew. Some had believed, some had hoped. Others still looked at her with eyes clouded by grief. The fear of arrest lingered in the air. The sound of footsteps outside made shoulders tighten. No one knew what would come next. The room was thick with questions. Faces turned toward the floor, fingers fidgeted with folds of linen, whispers rose and fell like waves against a fragile shore. But Mary carried something different. Her silence was not fear. Her stillness was not despair. Beneath the veil she wore and the softness of her posture, there was a steady flame, a hidden peace that glowed in the quiet spaces of her heart. She remembered his voice, his eyes, the way he had said her name, the way the morning air had shifted as he spoke. She had seen the world undone and made new. She did not know what would happen next, but she knew who held it. And in that knowing, she waited, while others sat in dread. Mary watched the light shifting through the cracks in the wall. And though the door remained closed, her heart was open. He appeared among them. Then it happened. No creak of hinges, no footsteps, no hand on the door. He was simply
there. In the middle of the room, where only a breath ago there had been empty air, Jesus stood. The silence deepened, not out of fear, but awe. His presence was like dawn breaking into night, like sunlight flooding a cave untouched by light.
Like warmth rising after a long and bitter cold, every shadow bent away from him, every heart turned toward him. He did not shout, he did not startle. His gaze moved gently across the room, resting on each face with love and recognition. There was no anger in him, no disappointment, no blame for their locked doors or frightened hearts, only peace. Mary's breath caught. She did not cry out. She did not move. But her soul trembled with joy. It was him, the Lord, the risen one. The same voice that called her in the garden now filled the room without a sound. His robe brushed the air, his eyes held eternity, and still he waited, as if he knew that they, like seeds beneath soil, needed time to reach toward the light. Then he lifted his hands. "Peace be with you, peace be with you," he said. 3 simple
words, but they carried the weight of heaven. The room, once dense with fear, began to breathe again. Shoulders lowered, hands dropped from anxious grips. Eyes that had refused to meet now looked toward him and saw the scars his hands bore.
The wound of nails. His side still carried the mark of the spear. And yet he stood whole, unharmed, shining with life beyond death. Tears filled the disciples' eyes. Joy rose like a river bursting its banks. And still he did not draw back. He let them see. Let them come close. Thomas reached forward, hesitating. Peter stepped closer, weeping, and Mary. Mary stood where she had been, her heart radiant. She had seen him first. And now they saw him too. Jesus smiled. Not with the smile of kings or victors, but with the quiet joy of one who had always loved, even when he was not believed, even when they had scattered, even when they had locked themselves away. He had come, not to confront, but to comfort. "Peace," he said again. Not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of wholeness, of grace, of God among them. The room, once narrow and dark, now felt vast, as if the very walls had pulled back to let heaven pour in. And Mary smiled through tears, because this was the promise fulfilled, the sorrow turned to song, the death undone. He was alive, and peace had found them, the breath of the Spirit. Then in a moment wrapped in stillness, he breathed. It was not a wind, not a storm, just breath, holy breath. He drew in and then exhaled, over them, through them, within them. And with it came something more than air, a presence, a power, a whisper of the Spirit that had hovered over waters at creation, that had spoken through prophets, that had descended like a dove, and now that Spirit rested on them. Soft as breath, strong as eternity. Jesus said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." And they did, not with shouting, not with spectacle, but with eyes closed, hearts opened, and hands lifted like petals in spring. Mary bowed her head. She felt the breath move across her skin like the kiss of wind in a garden. The same garden where he had first called her name. This was the beginning. He had risen, yes. But now he was sending. Their fear would not be the end of their story. Their hiding would not define them. They were being breathed into life again, commissioned, empowered, loved. Jesus lingered only a little longer, then was gone. Not gone forever, but gone from sight. His presence still lingered, like incense in the air, like sunlight that leaves warmth long after it fades. No one moved right away, no one spoke, but in every heart something had changed. The door was still closed, but inside peace had come, And the Spirit breathed on. Chapter 14. Doubt and Fire. The room had grown quieter in the days since Jesus first appeared among them. The fear that once sealed the doors had lessened, like fog giving way to light. Yet not everyone had seen what Mary saw, what the others had beheld with trembling awe. Thomas was not there. He had wandered the city's edge in thought, heart heavy with confusion, spirit tangled in grief. When he returned and heard the others speak, their joy rang too loud in his sorrow, their certainty too quick for his searching heart. He heard Mary's voice again, now joined by others. "We have seen the Lord," but Thomas lowered his gaze. His silence was not stubbornness, it was longing. His doubt was not defiance. It was grief's twin, holding the weight of crushed hope and unanswered prayers. Mary watched him. She did not scold. She did not push. Her own story had once been wrapped in shadows. She remembered what it felt like, not to see clearly, to be bound by fear, to wonder if healing was for others, but not for her. So she did what she had learned from Jesus himself. She waited. Mary knew grace was patient. That belief was not always born in the blaze of certainty, but could rise slowly, like dawn. And so, as the others spoke and Thomas wrestled with questions too deep for words, Mary remained still, her spirit calm, her hands folded. She did not try to prove him. She simply carried peace in her presence, as the garden had once carried the sound of her name. A second visit, 8 days passed. The room had not changed, nor had the silence, nor the soft murmurs of those still reflecting on what they had seen. But now Thomas was among them, and so was Mary, always near, never loud. Then once again, without a sound, he came. Jesus stood among them.
No latch turned, no step crossed the threshold. Yet he was there, as present as breath, as real as sunrise. And again his voice came gentle and clear. "Peace be with you." Thomas looked up. His breath caught, his eyes met the eyes of the other.
One he had followed, the one he had mourned. The one he now saw with wounds still present. Hands outstretched, side revealed, yet radiant with life. Jesus did not rebuke him. He did not mock his doubt or shame his delay. Instead, he spoke directly to the place of Thomas's ache. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." And Thomas, once drowning in silence, now rose to the surface of faith. "My Lord and my God," he whispered. Mary's heart stirred. She remembered when her own soul had awakened to that same truth, not by force, but by love. As Thomas stepped from night into light, Mary stood nearby, quiet but full. She saw again the beauty of Jesus' mercy, how it reached into the very place of fear and called forth trust. In that room, the risen Christ met doubt not with wrath, but with wounds offered in tenderness, and another heart found its way home. The fire by the lake time passed. Not much, but enough for the disciples to return briefly to the shores they had once known well. Galilee, where many of their stories had begun, called them back with the rhythm of waves, the scent of nets, and the simplicity of open skies. It was early morning when they saw the figure standing on the shore. The sea was calm, the wind low. A faint mist curled across the water like breath. They had fished through the night and caught nothing. But at his word, they cast the net once more. and it overflowed. Mary stood on the sand near the edge of the small fire. The flames danced softly, low and warm. Fish sizzled, bread was laid out, and the voice that once said, "Follow me," now said, "Come and eat." The others joined. Familiar rhythms returned, the breaking of bread, the laughter, the sharing of silence between friends. Mary did not speak much. She watched the way Peter glanced at Jesus, unsure, longing. She saw how the others smiled with wonder still fresh in their eyes. The world had changed, yet here was something beautifully the same. A meal by the water, a teacher among them, a fire kindled not just on the sand, but in their hearts. In the warmth of that fellowship, Mary found something sacred, not a grand moment of glory, but the sweetness of return. He was not only Lord of life and death, he was the one who cooked for his friends. He fed the weary. He restored the familiar. In the quiet of the shoreline, grace took the shape of bread and fire. "Feed my sheep." As the meal ended and the fire burned low, Jesus turned to Peter. 3 times, he asked.
Not once, not twice, but 3 times. "Do you love me?" Each time, Peter answered, his voice touched by sorrow and hope. "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know I love you." And each time, Jesus replied, not with judgment, but with invitation. "Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep." Mary listened. Her heart caught the weight of it. This was not just forgiveness. This was restoration. Peter had denied him 3 times, but now 3 times love was spoken, not
as punishment, but as healing, each answer a step back into purpose, each word a thread mending what had torn. Mary saw how grace not only covered the wound, it entrusted the one who had failed. Peter was not cast aside, he was called again. And in that sacred moment, Mary understood more deeply what she had long known. That Jesus did not merely rescue the broken, he entrusted them with his flock. He restored, he called, he sent. By the fire, in the quiet of the shore, a leader was reborn, and Mary, who had once wept at his tomb, now stood, witnessing how the risen Lord sowed love where shame had been. The waves lapped gently. The embers flickered, and the shepherd's voice still called, "Feed my sheep." Chapter 15. The Road Beyond. The morning air on the Mount of Olives was clear and still. Not the silence of sorrow, but the silence of something holy approaching. A silence that waited to breathe. The sky stretched soft above the hillside, pale with early light, and the olive trees stood in gentle hush as the teacher gathered his own. Jesus stood among them once more, no longer the suffering man of Calvary, nor the mysterious visitor behind locked doors, but radiant, calm, eternal. The wounds in his hands still remained, but they no longer spoke of death. They glowed with resurrection, with promise, with power. Mary was there, as she had been through every part of the story. She did not stand at the center, but she stood steady. Her eyes held no fear. Her soul had known the tomb, and now it knew the glory. Around her, the others listened closely. Their hearts were not as heavy as before, though sorrow had not vanished. It had been transformed. The fear that once held them captive had unraveled in the presence of the risen one, and now he was about to return to the Father. Jesus lifted his hands to bless them, and in that sacred moment every word he had ever spoken seemed to hang in the air like morning dew. Words of mercy, of healing, of kingdom and forgiveness. Mary remembered it all, the first time he called her name, the garden, the locked room, the fire by the lake, and now this. His robe shimmered in the growing light. The wind stirred softly among the trees, and then, slowly, gently, he began to rise. Not in haste, not in distance, but in majesty. He was lifted from the ground, as if heaven itself had reached down to draw him home. His eyes met theirs, tender, eternal. His face shone not with fire, but with peace. And Mary watched with a heart full of awe. There were no trumpets, no great storms, but the glory was unmistakable. The one who had wept, who had walked dusty roads, who had
stooped to wash feet,
now rose above the hills of Galilee, and the sky received him with open arms. A cloud hides him. He rose until a soft cloud passed before him, not thick but gentle, like the veil in the temple, like breath in the morning air. And then he was gone from sight. The disciples stood motionless, eyes still lifted, not in despair, not in panic, but in wonder. Mary too kept her gaze on the cloud, but she did not weep. She did not crumble. She remembered how he had said it would be so, that he must return to the Father, that he would send the Helper, and the cloud, its gentle curtain of heaven, was not an absence, but a mystery. He was hidden from their eyes, but not from their hearts. His voice had quieted, but his presence had not departed. She remembered the stillness of the tomb, the silence before the dawn. This was not like that. This was different. This was not the emptiness of loss. This was the fullness of a promise. The angel who appeared beside them said, "This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back." The voice was kind, steady. It did not explain everything, but it pointed them forward. Mary lowered her gaze at last. Around her, the others did the same. Not one of them spoke. They did not need to. The hush was not emptiness. It was reverence. The cloud still lingered in the sky, faint and white, like a seal placed upon the end of one chapter and the opening of another. They had seen him leave, but their story with him was far from over. Returning to wait, their feet returned to Jerusalem, but their hearts remained lifted. Each step down the mount was lighter than the last. The city that once felt like a place of death now shimmered with new meaning. The same streets where Mary had once run weeping now echoed with quiet joy. The same upper room where fear had once locked the doors now called them home. They returned, not with haste, but with peace. The walk was not long, but each moment felt deliberate, as if their steps were marking sacred ground. Mary walked near the middle of the group. She did not lead, but her presence held weight. Not of pride, but of peace. The others knew her story. They knew how deeply she had loved him, how faithfully she had followed, how clearly She had believed. She had seen the empty tomb. She had seen him rise. And now she returned to wait, just as he had asked. Back in the upper room, the air
felt changed.
It still held the scent of oil and bread, of wood and stone, but now it carried something more: expectancy. They gathered not in dread, but in hope. Mary took her place near the window, her hands folded. Around her, the disciples settled into prayer. Not rushed, not routine, but slow, like the stirring of waters. She looked around the room and saw faces that had been changed. Peter, now restored. Thomas, now believing. James and John, once sons of thunder, now sons of stillness. And she, once tormented, once forgotten, now sat as a pillar of peace. The waiting had begun, but this time it did not feel like waiting for sorrow. It felt like preparing for joy. 10 days of prayer. The days passed gently. They did not count the time by hours, but by prayer. Morning rose with songs. Evenings closed with whispers. In between, silence sat among them like a friend. They waited, not with arms crossed, but with hearts open. Mary's voice joined the others in soft petitions, not of anxiety, but of longing. They prayed for what they could not yet understand, for the Spirit he had promised, for whatever it was that would come and make them ready. In those 10 days, no one rushed.
No one argued. They listened. They remembered. They spoke of his words, his miracles, his hands breaking bread. They told the stories over and over, not because they forgot, but because they treasured. Each retelling was a prayer, each memory a seed. The Spirit had not yet come, but they could feel the breath of heaven drawing near. Mary sometimes closed her eyes and returned to the garden, to the moment he called her name. That moment lived inside her like a fire that never flickered. She
had once been lost. Now she was lit from within. On the 10th night, the air shifted. It was not loud, not yet, but there was something in the quiet, like the stillness before rain, the hush before a great tide. They did not know what it would look like, but they knew it would come, and in that room, in that waiting, Mary's soul stood tall. She was not the same woman who once wept in Magdala. She was the one who stayed, the one who believed, the one who waited in faith for the Spirit of God. And soon the wind would come. Chapter 16. Pentecost. The morning began as any other. The sun eased its way over the rooftops of Jerusalem, casting soft golden light through narrow streets. Inside the upper room, the hush of prayer continued. Steady, sacred, tender. It had been 10 days since the ascension, 10 days since Jesus had been taken up in the cloud. Mary sat near the wall, her eyes closed, her breathing slow. The stillness of the space had become familiar. There was a rhythm to their waiting now. Prayers rising like incense, silence deepening like water. The others sat close, united not just by proximity, but by purpose. Then suddenly, the sound came. Not a whisper, not a breeze, but a wind, rushing, full, alive. It roared not from outside, but from within. It came like a breath, drawn from the lungs of heaven, like the stirring of creation itself. Mary's eyes opened wide. Her heart stirred. It was not frightening, though it shook the walls. It was not wild, though it moved like storm. It was holy, as if the Spirit of God had wrapped itself in sound and descended with joy. The whole room seemed to tremble with glory. The air was thick with presence, rich with mystery. And within Mary's soul, something opened. She felt it. The Spirit moving not just around her, but through her, like the garden morning when he had spoken her name, like the breath of Jesus on that quiet evening when he had said, "Receive the Spirit." But now it was louder, deeper. Not gentle wind, but wind with voice. A wind that said, "This is the time." This was the promise fulfilled, and Mary, once lost in shadows, now stood in the center of holy fire, tongues of flame. And then, as if wind was not enough, came fire. Not fire that burned with pain, not fire that destroyed, but fire that rested. Flames appeared above their heads, small, bright, and alive. Tongues of light, one upon each of them. The room, already filled with sound, now shone with the glow of the divine. The Spirit had not come to visit. The Spirit had come to dwell. Mary felt the warmth of it, the life of it, the fullness of it. It did not consume her. It filled her. It did not scorch. It sanctified. Her lips parted, and she spoke, not in her language, but in one she had never learned. Words flowed like water, words she did not understand but knew were holy. She was not alone. The others spoke too, each voice rising in new tongues, echoing the languages of distant lands. It was as if the whole world had been gathered into one room, and God was speaking to each part. Mary looked to her left and to her right. Faces shone with wonder. Peter's voice rang out in syllables not his own. John's eyes were wide with light, and Mary, she felt no fear, only joy. The fire did not frighten her. She had known darkness. She had known chains. But now she knew this: the Spirit of the living God had made his home in her. She was not the woman she had once been. She was a bearer of light, not by her strength, not by her wisdom, but by grace. The fire rested, and the world was changed. The crowd gathers outside. Jerusalem stirred. It was the season of Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks. Pilgrims from every nation had filled the city: Parthians and Medes, Egyptians and Romans, Cretans and Arabs. The streets
pulsed with life, but now they heard the sound, the wind, the voices.
The languages, not random, not strange, but familiar. One by one they gathered. Eyes lifted, ears leaned in. Confusion came first, then amazement. For each person heard their own tongue spoken, not in chaos but in clarity. "How is this possible?" they asked. Mary stepped to the edge of the room, looking out through the upper window. The crowd grew below, faces tilted up in awe. She listened as the gospel flowed like morning light across the square. No longer hidden, no longer whispered. This was the good news, spoken in every language under heaven. Peter, once afraid, now stepped forward with strength. His voice rose above the murmurs. he declared the truth, not his truth, but God's, that Jesus, the crucified one, had risen, that the Spirit now lived in those who believed, that this day, this wind, this fire was the beginning, not the end. And Mary watched. She did not speak from the rooftop, but she prayed, she remembered, she believed. The voices of women too filled the air, unnamed but not unseen. The Spirit had not chosen only the bold or the wise. He had chosen hearts made ready, and Mary, once healed, now stood in the place of healing. The gospel was no longer bound to one tongue, one nation, one place. It moved like dawn, slowly, steadily, rising across the face of the earth. A new beginning. As the sun lifted higher over Jerusalem, something eternal had begun. 3,000 souls believed that day. They were baptized, they were filled, they were welcomed into the body. And Mary walked among them like a gentle flame. She was not loud, she did not claim titles, but her presence was steady, sacred. She knew what it meant to be made whole. And now she saw it happening again, in the eyes of strangers who had become brothers, in the songs of worship rising from every corner of the city. The church had been born not in a palace, not in a temple, but in an upper room, with fire and wind, with unity and praise. This was the place where broken hearts were restored, where outcasts were embraced, where language no longer divided, but united. Mary's eyes lingered on the faces of the new believers. She saw young and old, men and women, rich and poor, all filled with the same Spirit. She remembered the silence of her past, the darkness that once wrapped around her soul, and now, light. A light not of her own making, but one placed inside her by the breath of God. She was not just a witness to Jesus' story. She was part of its unfolding, not just healed, but healing. Not just restored, but commissioned. And so she stayed, in the quiet moments, in the loud gatherings, in the breaking of bread, in the fellowship of saints. The road beyond had begun, and Mary, daughter of Magdalene, bearer of peace, walked it with grace. Chapter 17. The Legacy of Love. The days after Pentecost unfolded like petals in the warmth of spring. Slowly, quietly, beautifully, the church grew, not with thunder, not with force, but with love and shared bread, with prayers whispered at dawn and lamps lit late into the night. And among the early believers, steady, silent, radiant, was Mary of Magdala. She was no longer at the center of every scene, but she was always near. Her presence was like a warm lamp in the corner of the room, not the brightest, but one whose glow touched everything it reached. She served where she was needed. She listened when others needed to speak. She prayed as if the wind of Pentecost still danced in her chest. And she lived with such peace that even the anxious found comfort in her nearness. Often, someone would ask her, softly, reverently, "Were you really there?" And she would nod, eyes shining. "I saw him," she would say, and she would tell her story again, not with pride, not as one trying to be heard, but as one remembering something too holy to keep hidden. She told them of the garden, of the voice that called her name, of how she thought he was the gardener until he spoke. She told of the others, of the upper room, of the breath of the Spirit, of the tongues of fire. And every time those who listened felt their hearts burn within them, for she did not just tell the story, she carried it in her very being, the story of a woman once cast down, now lifted by grace, the story of how love found her, freed her, and filled her. And as the believers gathered in homes and courtyards, sharing meals and prayers, Mary remained a living witness to the beginning. Remembering the garden in quiet moments, Mary would return to the memory that never dimmed. The garden. The morning mist still clung to her soul. The scent of dew on stone. The stillness that wrapped the tomb. The angels seated where his body had been. The empty space. The sound of her weeping. And then the voice, Mary. She did not need to close her eyes to remember it. She could still feel how the air changed when he spoke, how her name, spoken by the one who knew her completely, had awakened something eternal in her soul. That moment was more than memory. It was the beginning of her new life. Every joy she lived after that day traced its roots to that garden moment. Every act of love,
every breath of peace, every word she spoke, they all bloomed from that soil. She never forgot the tomb.
But even more, she never forgot the voice that turned her sorrow into song. Others came to her often asking how to stay close to Jesus when he was no longer visible. And she would say, "Listen for his voice. He still speaks, not through wind or thunder, but through stillness, through love." Sometimes in the hush of evening, she would walk through small patches of green near the edge of the city. She would pause where fig trees grew or where flowers opened to the sun. And in the breeze, she would remember, not with longing, but with peace. For he had not left her. He had only stepped deeper into her spirit, to the ends of the earth as the apostles went out, Peter to one city, John to another, Paul to lands far beyond. The story of Jesus spread like rivers through dry ground. And though Mary did not travel as they did, her voice went with them. In distant places, new believers heard of her, the woman from Magdala, who had once lived in torment, who had seen the risen Christ with her own eyes. Her name was whispered in households and shouted in open courtyards. She was the first, they said, not the first to believe, but the first to behold, the first to witness. Children sat at their mother's feet, hearing how Jesus had healed her, how he had trusted her with the greatest news of all. Young women heard her name and saw in it a path of hope, that they too were seen, that their stories mattered, and men listened with reverence, not because she was powerful in the world's eyes, but because she was faithful. Mary's testimony, spoken in humble rooms, was carried by the wind of the Spirit. Her life, once hidden, became a lamp for those stumbling in darkness. She did not need to write letters or cross seas. Her story lived in hearts. Wherever the gospel traveled, so too did the echo of that garden morning. The woman who was once bound, now free. The one who knelt, weeping, now risen with joy. A witness not only to resurrection, but to restoration. The gospel of peace. In her final years, Mary lived simply. No titles, no grand possessions, only prayer, only love. She welcomed strangers with gentleness. She taught young believers with patience. And above all, she listened, not just to words, but to hearts. Her home, wherever it was, became a place of quiet refuge, a place where bread was broken slowly, where stories of Jesus were told as if he might walk through the door at any moment. And in truth, he did. For wherever love was shared, he was near. Mary never called herself a teacher. She did not claim honor, but those who sat beside her felt the gospel not just in her words, but in her presence. She showed them what it meant to be seen by God, to be healed, to be sent. She prayed not with many words, but with full heart, sometimes through the night, sometimes with tears, but always in peace. And in every act, the way she folded linen, or offered figs from her table, or blessed a child, there was something sacred. She lived what she had received, that Jesus does not overlook, that he comes to the broken, that he speaks names into resurrection and sends his beloved ones to share the news. Her story became a quiet song, one not shouted but sung in hearts across generations. And when her time came to return to the one she loved, there was no fear, only the memory of a garden and the voice that had once called her name. Chapter 18. The Last Light of Magdala. The hills of Galilee stood quiet beneath the soft blue sky, their green edges folding gently down into the waters of the sea. The same waves rolled in as they always had, the same rhythm, the same hush, the same wind. But Mary was not the same. Years had passed like flowing water, some gentle, some swift, some full of joy, others touched by sorrow. But now, in the final season of her life, she had come home. Back to Magdala. The village had changed little. The sun still warmed the stones of the paths. The boats still rocked gently in the shallows. The olive groves still stretched their silver leaves toward the morning. But Mary did not return as a child of the town. She returned as a daughter of the kingdom. Her feet, once hurried with fear, now moved slowly with peace. Her eyes, once wide with confusion, now rested calmly on the sea. She no longer wept by the water. She watched. She listened. And sometimes, just before dawn, she would walk to the shore and press her hand to her chest, remembering. The girl who once lived here was long gone. In her place stood a woman who had seen the risen Lord. She did not need to speak of it aloud. The memory had become part of her breath, the quiet truth that wrapped around her like the shawl on her shoulders. The people of the village welcomed her. Some remembered her past, but most knew her peace. Children followed her, drawn by her, calm. Mothers offered her figs and bread. Elders asked for her blessing, and she gave, always gently, always humbly. Mary of Magdala had come home, not to the place of her pain, but to the place of her peace. A life remembered. She spent her days near the window, the light spilling in across woven rugs and baskets of dried herbs. The sound of waves lulled her into reflection, the way a lullaby stirs memories in the quiet
of night. Mary remembered everything. She remembered the shadows, the early days when torment clouded her mind, when fear clawed at her thoughts, when voices not her own filled the silence with dread. She remembered how heavy her body once felt,
how dark the world had seemed, and then, the moment he looked at her, not with fear, not with judgment, but with knowing, with love. She remembered the stillness that followed when his voice cast the darkness away. She remembered the way her first breath of peace felt like the sea breeze, full, cleansing, alive. She remembered following him through dusty towns, into crowded homes, up rocky hillsides. She remembered his teachings, his stories, his silence. She remembered standing at the foot of the cross. She remembered the ache in her chest, the way the sky darkened, the way the earth trembled, and she remembered the tomb, the garden, the morning light, the angels, his voice. Mary. That single word had never left her. It had echoed through every season, every prayer, every breath. And now, as she neared the end of her journey, it glowed within her like a lantern held close. Her life had been full, not of riches, not of fame, but of love. A life once broken, now healed. A soul once scattered, now whole. And all because of him. The sleep of the faithful, the days grew slower. Her steps once steady, now softened with age. Her hands once quick to serve, now rested more often in her lap. But her spirit was still light. She smiled easily. She blessed freely. And when she could not walk to the water, the children came and told her of the waves. They described the boats and the birds and the color of the morning sky. She would close her eyes and listen, each word like a brushstroke, painting the familiar shores in her heart. Her body grew tired, but her soul remained at rest. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were simple, full of light. "Love well," she would whisper. "Forgive quickly." Wait for his voice. The nights were quiet. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sea turned gold, Mary sat near the doorway, her face turned toward the fading light. She said nothing, only smiled. And when the stars came out and the world hushed beneath their glow, she lay down. No fear, no struggle, just peace. She closed her eyes, and as sleep overtook her, her breath slowed and then stopped. But the silence was not heavy. It was soft, like the breath of a candle being gently blown out, or the whisper of a garden morning until he calls again. There were no crowds, no trumpets, just a still room, a resting body, and a soul carried upward like fragrance on the wind. She had waited her whole life to hear his voice again, and now, somewhere beyond what eyes could see, he called. Mary, the same voice, the same love. The same joy that once met her in the garden now welcomed her home. And the one who once cast out her sorrow now prepared her place. There were flowers blooming. There was light without end. There was a garden, not of tombs, but of eternity, and
there she ran again, not with fear,
not with grief, but with delight, with worship, with awe. Her story on earth had closed like a book read by candlelight. But in heaven, the story was just beginning. The name the world once dismissed, forgotten, scorned, whispered in shame, was
now known in heaven's courts. Mary Magdalene, the woman he healed, the one who stayed, the one who saw
him first and loved him always. Her life had been a lamp, her legacy, a light that would never go out, and so her name remains. In scripture, in hearts, in the story of faith, forever remembered, forever beloved, until the day when all who love him shall hear him say their name and rise to meet the morning again.